Okay, let's get into the next shiur, the second Bishul shiur here in volume 18 of the Tzurba Merabanan. Again, the Lax Family Edition. This volume is sponsored Leili Nishbas Yaker, Hexter, and David Schwartz, who gave their lives al Kiddush Hashem, defending Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael. This is the last shiur of Bishul de Oraisa. We've had a couple of shiurim, rules and regulations of Bishul. Today there's a couple of other 4 topics specifically related to Bishul, and then next time we get into Bishul de Rabbanan, Shehiyah, Hachazara, and Hatmana are the next 3 shiurim, which talk all about Bishul. But today we're still in Bishul de Oraisa. 3 discussions. One is different types of Bishul, Bishul achar afiyah, afiyah achar Bishul. Number 2, what about preparing toast on Shabbos? Is that an issue? Number 3, what about kirev bishula, which we already mentioned in the past year, but now we'll see some more sources on it. And finally, number 4, a related topic to Bishul, and that is defrosting near a heat source, and the opposite, frosting, about making ice and crushing ice and defrosting ice. So we'll get to all of those today. So B'ez Hashem, let's start. Bishul achar Bishul. So we are on page 77 in volume number 18. If you're keeping track, source page 77. The next year, Bishul achar afiyah. So we learned already the principle of ein Bishul achar Bishul, and we spoke about the sheet of the Shulchan Aruch, the sheet of the Rambam, the sheet of the Ramah. Remember, the Rambam says ein Bishul achar Bishul. Period. Doesn't matter if it's liquids. Doesn't matter if it's solids. Once something is cooked, it's cooked. The Shulchan Aruch says yesh Bishul achar Bishul by liquids and not by solids, while the Ramah says ein Bishul achar Bishul, even by liquids, as long as it is not in its tanim legamrei. But that is all where we do the same process. What's called, there are 2 types of cooking in halacha. There's what we might call moist cooking and dry cooking. Dry cooking is what's called baking, afiyah or tzli, roasting. That's not in water. But boiling or cooking, like you make noodles in water, or you make something cooked in chicken soup, right? That's cooking. That's bishul. So when you do the same exact halachic process, then for sure that's what we've been talking about. Ein Bishul achar Bishul, ein afiyah achar afiyah, ein tzli achar tzli. But what happens if one of those processes is different? What about if I do dry cooking and I want to do wet cooking, or vice versa? What if I have noodles and now, which I will make in boiling, and then I want to make it in a dry heat? So that's the sugya of Bishul achar afiyah, afiyah achar Bishul, and that is a major machlokes rishonim between the Baalei HaTosfos. It's really 2 gemaras. Try to figure out how to put 2 gemaras together. The Gemara in Pesachim Daf Mem Aleph gives one impression, and the Gemara in Brachas gives another impression. The Gemara in Pesachim Daf Mem Aleph is talking about the isser of cooking the Korban Pesach. Right, one has to not allowed to boil the Korban Pesach. It has to be roasted. Right? It has to be kiyim sli eish. And it cannot be mavushal. So the Gemara says, what happens if it was roasted and then I cooked it? Or I cooked it and then I roasted it? So says the Gemara, Bishlo v'yachar kach tzlo v'yachar kach bishlo chayev. Yeah, you're chayev daraisa. And this is the daraisa of cooking the Korban Pesach. So says the Gemara, Bishlama I understand if I cooked it and then I roasted it. So forget the roasting. I cooked it. I violate the iser. But if I roasted the Korban Pesach, it's perfect. It's ready to eat, and then I boiled it. So why is that a problem? I already roasted it. Isn't it already done? Answers the Gemara. Amar of Kahana. This is following Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Rabbi Yossi, who says that if you take matzah and you boil the matzah, you are no longer able to use that matzah as matzah's mitzvah, because it is now lost its status. That's Rashi's lashon, right? The Gemara says that you could use soaked matzah. If I soak it in cold water, maybe to make it soft for somebody who can't chew. But if I cook it, so then Rabbi Yossi says, Yosef b'rukik asharei v'lo b'mevushal. Why? So Rashi explains, because once you cook it, it loses its status. Rashi on the next page, Pesachim Mem Aleph, avalo b'mevushal, delav lechem karina bei, v'yafal b'shekvar nefa batanur, and even though it's already baked, it's perfect matzah. Hoil v'chazer ubishlo, bitlo mitoras lechem. Wow. Right? It's matzah, it's no longer matzah. And therefore you can't use it. So what do you see from that Gemara? Says the Yereim, says Rabbi Elazar Mimetz, if I do one cooking process and then I do a different type of cooking process, the second cooking process is significant and effective and changes the previous status, and that's why you'd be chayiv for Bishul of Korban Pesach, and that's why the matzah is no longer matzah, and that's why for Hilchot Shabbos, says the Yereim, right? This is not about Shabbos, but says Hilchot Shabbos, says the Yereim, it would be a problem too. So that's the Yereim. Let's read the Yereim now. Siman Reish Ayin Daled. That's the siman about Hilchot Shabbos for the Yereim. Source number 3. V'chol davar sheniz bashel, o nefa kol tzarcho. Anything that has been cooked or fully baked. Lahachzira b'kli rishon lachamo. You want to put it back? Mutter. It's mutter that we learn. Ein bishul lacha bishul. That's a Mishnah in Shabbos. Mishnah in Shabbos. Kol shabbat b'chavim be'erev Shabbos. Shorta so b'chavim b'Shabbos. But says the Yereim, avol yesh bishul achar tzli ve'isli achar bishul. But if you change the process, so then it's going to be an Isser Da'araisa on Shabbos. An Isser Da'araisa. The tiny Psachim, as it says in Psachim, he quotes that Gemara, Psachim Mem Aleph, and you see, Rabbi Yossi Shita. Rabbi Yossi Shita, if you boil matzah, you can no longer use it for matzah. So you see, cooking after baking is significant for matzah, so too is significant for Shabbos, and that's the Shita of the Yereim. But there's another Gemara. There's a Gemara in Brachas Daf Lamed Ches, where the Gemara there is talking about brachas on vegetables. What bracha do you make on vegetables? You make a bracha on a zucchini, on a cucumber. You make a bracha of Bori Priyadama. What happens if you cook it and you make it into what's called shlakos? Shlakos, cooked vegetables. Does that change the bracha? So the Gemara says, shlakos, Rabbi Yochanan, mevarchan alav shahakol nihiyeh b'dvaro. Right, machlokes, that's the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan. Right, the earlier sheet said Adama, Shakol Niyeh B'Varo. So the Gemara says, one second, this seems to be a machlokas tanoim, whether cooking changes the status of the vegetable, seems to be a machlokas tanoim, and what does the Gemara quote? Our machlokas about matzah. About matzah. Rabbi Yossi says that if you cook matzah, it's no longer matzah. But there's a different shita, right? The Rabbi Meir, we didn't quote Rabbi Meir before, he's the other shita in that brisa, that says, no, even if you cook it, you could use it. So isn't that the same machlokas as the Gemara? Whether cooking matzah after baking it removes the status of matzah, isn't that the same machlokas as cooking a vegetable, whether it changes from a hadama to a shahakol? And the Gemara answers, no. There's no machlokas here. Rabbi Yossi is a special din in matzah. Really, cooking it does not change the status. But Rabbi Yossi, especially the matzah, it's got to taste like matzah. And once you cook it, it no longer tastes like matzah. V'lo, he says, the Gemara, brachas lamed ches. To kulei alma shlakos mavarchan ala bar priyadama. V'yad kalakav Rabbi Yossi asam. When does Rabbi Yossi say over there that cooking the matzah is a problem? Ela mishum debin an tam matzah v'leka. Because it has to taste like matzah. Aval hacha afil Rabbi Yossi modo. But Rabbi Yossi would agree that it doesn't change the status of a vegetable. What do you see from that Gemara in brachas? That Rabbi Yossi is a special din of matzah. What's the Yereim talking about? Rabbi Elazar Met says, you learn from matzah to Hilchot Shabbos. This Gemara sounds like it's a special din in matzah. Says the Ravya, one of the other great Rishonim, Chachmei Ashkenaz, says the Ravya, you see from this Gemara that Ein Bishul Achar Afiyah, Ein Afiyah Achar Bishul, there's no problem. No, Ein meaning there's no problem of it. So it's a machlokas between the Ravya and the Yereim. The Ravya says he heard a shiur from the Yereim. V'shamati mi Rabbi Elazar Metz, Shaya Omer, source number 5 now, on page 80. Ein bishul achar bishul b'Shabbos, v'chein ein afiyah achar afiyah, but yesh afiyah achar bishul, v'yesh bishul achar afiyah. And it says, I think it's wrong. I think the Rishonim were trying to figure out what the Gemaras tell us. So the Gemara Pesachim points in one direction, this Gemara points in another direction. V'lav milsahi. So it's a major machlokas Rishonim, and both shitas are quoted in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch and Shin Yud Ches, we know our siman about Bishul. Shin Yud Ches of Hey, the Shulchan Aruch says, source number 6, Yesh Misha Omer, the davar shenefa o netzle. Some say that if something is baked or roasted, that means dry heat. In bishlo achar kach b'mashke yesh bo mishum bishul. V'azlitin pasa filo b'klisheni, which would mean bread. If somebody has bread or matzah, putting it into a hot, for sure, kli rishon, that's cooking it after baking it, that would be a problem. Are you allowed to crush up matzah and put it into your soup? Let's say forget the soup. That might be a kli we'll get to soon. But let's say putting it into a kli rishon. So that would be a problem. The yesh matirin, and some are matir. So 2 days quoted in the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah says, we're machmir, l'chadchila. Ramah says, hagav v'nagol lizar l'chadchila, shaloli tein patza filo b'klisheni, chozman sheyad soledispo. So that is step 1. Step 2, machlokes rishonim, and then step 2 is Shulchan Aruch quotes both opinions. The Ramah says yesh la'achmer. What does the Shulchan Aruch quote when he quotes 2 opinions? We'll have to wait and see for a minute. But some achronim, before we even get to that, some achronim point out that there seems to be a steer in the Shulchan Aruch. Because the Shulchan Aruch in the same siman, Sif Tezvav, Shin Yud Ches at the end of the siman, Sif Tezvav, we've quoted this before. When the Shulchan Aruch says, Dover Shin Isbashal Kol Tzarcho, V'hu Yaveh, Shein Bo Marak, when you have something that's dry and want to reheat it, this was the Ein Bishul Achar Bishul Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says if it's dry, Mutter Lahanicho Keneged HaMedura, you can put it next to the fire, even where it's going to get the Yatzo Ledispo. But 1 second, it's dry, but maybe it was Mavushal. Maybe it was Mavushal the first time, and now you're putting it into next to the fire where it's dry, and it's going to be Halachically Tzli or Afiyah. So doesn't the Shulchan Aruch and Shiddur Chesif Tezvav sound like he's allowing dry heat after moist heat? Meaning there's no problem with Tzliya or Afiyah Achar Bishul. So the Bir Halacha points out that problem. The Bir Halacha points out that problem, and he does not give an answer. The Bir Halacha there in Shiddur Ches, Sif Tezvav, Tzarachiyun, Hala Elba Sifhei, in Sifhei, he quotes Blazami Metz, who's Machmir, right? And the Shulchan Aruch quotes 2 opinions there and only the Mekel opinion here. So how do you answer this question? So the Chazon Ish says a very important yesod, and this helps us out lamaisa a lot. Not everybody's aware of this Chazon Ish. I wasn't aware of it till recently, but it's so mistaver. The Chazon Ish says, when you're warming something up, let's say you have schnitzel, and you deep fried schnitzel, and now you're warming it up. Is that roasting it? Is that re-cooking it when you warm something up? You have to really change the quality of what you're warming up to be called sli or afiyah. When you have, let's say, bread, and you're going to put it into boiling hot soup, okay, there's going to be a difference in that bread. But here, when you're taking schnitzel that was deep fried, and now you're going to warm it up, says the Chazon Ish, that's not called sliach or afiyah. That's called nothing. That's called reheating. Says the Chazon Ish, source number 9. Var, what an important Chazon Ish. V'yal karchach tzarech lomar. To kol shelo yavo letam sli mamish. Elashis yabish kzaz is going to get dried out a little bit. It's going to get warmed up. Ein bazeh bishal acha bishal. The efshad that sli keder kedim bishul in yinzev adafkat sli al gechalim. You put it on. You're gonna give it. You're gonna roast it. You're gonna make it smoky. You're gonna make it taste barbecued. Okay, that's a difference. But otherwise, not. That answers the steer of the Shulchan Aruch. The Chazon Ish says in Sif Tezvav, it's not a true case of tzliya achar bishul because you're just warming it up. And the other Shulchan Aruch, he quotes 2 days. There. That's one answer, says the Chazon Ish. But others, Rav Ovadia, you have it there in source number 10, gives a different answer, and he says, really, the Shulchan Aruch paskins lakula. Even though the Shulchan Aruch quotes 2 opinions, he paskins lakula. Usually, what's the rule? When the Shulchan Aruch quotes 2 opinions, if he quotes the first one as a stama and the second one as a yesh omrim, you pass like the stama, the first one. But here they're both yesh omrims. So says the Rav Ovadia, in that case, you could paskin like the second one. And not only that, Rav Ovadia says here in source number 10, look closely. The first opinion, the Yereim, is quoted as a yesh misha omer in singular. While the second opinion of the Rav Yah, the yesh batirin in the plural. So Rav Ovadia says that also pushes us to be mekel. So Rav Ovadia says, according to Svardim, there's no problem. We pass them like the Rav Yah, and therefore you're allowed to be bishul achar afiyah, afiyah achar bishul, no problem. Like that Gemara, the Pasha of the Gemara in Maseches Brachos. And that's how you answer the stira. In Sif Tezvav, he's only quoting the opinion that we hold like. But again, the Ramah is machmer. The Ramah, for sure, is l'chumra in Sif Hey. He says, maybe that's why the Ramah says that, because he understood the Shulchan Aruch as being Meko, and therefore he felt that he should be machmer. That's the Rav Ovadia's comment in source number 10, halacha ki yesh omer basra, and also it is again the singular and the plural as we said. Rav Yitzchak Yosef also in the Yakid Yosef says this heter, and therefore mutuliti pas b'marak. There's no problem putting the bread in the hot soup because we don't pass like this whole chumrah. It's a chumrah. We don't pass in this way. That's what Rav Yitzchak Yosef says based on his father Rav Ovadia. But other poskim, even Sephardic poskim, Rabbi Shalom Rosner says no. Yesh lahachmir. It's not so mafurish that we're mekel. The Tshuvas Or Letzion in source number 12 on page 83. Iker kedivrei ha'achronim b'shulchan aruch b'semen shidduch chesef hey lahachmir b'tzli achar bishul. You should be machmir. V'yav shehevi, even the quote das of the Yishomer Basra lahatir. Give it shiachol lechel esapas below lasos tzrimim. I think ein lahakel bazeh. And therefore lamaisa, the Aruch HaShabbos quotes many cases that where this issue would come up. Kasvu aposkim she'ein lavashol davar aful yitzli. If you have something baked or that was roasted, you cannot cook it afterwards. V'avshem malachas afia hi b'chlal malachas bishul, even though it's already mavushal. And ein achar afia mikal makom pulas habishul nosedes tam chadash b'machal. If there's a new taste, if there's something new accomplished in the second stage, v'chosheshem leiser bishul achar afia. V'lachein, therefore, ein litain pas b'marak chamshi atzol ledesbo. Putting bread in boiling hot soup, assuming, again, we're going to get into the klisheni klishlishi issues, but putting it in there would be a problem. Even in a klisheni, he says, why? If you assume, like we did last time, that bread is kali bishul, so then putting it into a klisheni, if the bowl is a klisheni, so that's a problem. Because yesh afia achar bishul, and therefore this is a problem. Or one of those, somebody has those baked croutons, the cubes, not the yellow soup nuts, because those are deep fried. That's already mavushal. But baked croutons, so then it could be a problem. Ein litin, he says, ein litin biscuit beto koste. Some have the minhag of putting biscuits into their tea. So again, if the tea is a klisheni and the biscuit, it's bishul achar afia afshe beklisheni v'chulu. Ein litin tavlioso avkas sukarios afila beklisheni. If somebody has some other type of a powder that was cooked and maybe baked in dry heat in the factory, but other types of afkat nemesod, like soup powder or cocoa, any of those, that could be a problem because it could be bishul achar afia. But there could be a heter. I think we mentioned this last time as well, but now we see it inside. There is a heter if you assume, like the Rav Moshe that we saw last week, but the heter of kli shlishi, it could be that your soup bowl is a kli shlishi. As we've said, the ladle. If you use a ladle, it could be that the ladle is called a klisheni, and the bowl is called a kli shlishi. And the Mishnah Berurah quotes that. We discussed that last time, I think, from the Taz and the Marshal. We mentioned as a machlokas in your Deya, and the poskim say if you just put the ladle in, so does that give it the status of a kli rishon because it's in the kli rishon, but it's not on the fire. So the Mishnah Berurah says that at least you could consider the bowl a kli shlishi. We mentioned maybe the ladle you'd have to be machmer to be called a kli rishon, but the bowl is a kli shlishi, and therefore if you hold to the heter of a Moshe about kli shlishi, you can do anything you want in a kli shlishi. Put bread or matzah, and that's what the Mishnah Berurah quotes in source 14. L'chal hapachos yishav bekaf min hakadera shetia hakara kli shlishi. Again, if it stays in there, some poskim say if the ladle stays in there a long time, like you just leave it, so you serve the soup, and while you serve the soup, you leave the ladle in the soup, then that gets a little trickier, because then maybe it steams up and it sits there. How long does something have to be on a fire to be called a kli rishon? So it could be that one shouldn't leave the ladle in if you want it to still be called a kli sheni, to make the bowl into a kli shlishi. Good. Says the Shmir Shabbos also discusses this stira in the Shulchan Aruch. Again, the Shulchan Aruch said we had one answer of the Rav Avadia. He really passes the kula. The answer of Chazon Ish that he's not really being machmir. So we had those two. I'm sorry, but now we'll talk about the other stira. I'm sorry. The other stira of the Shulchan Aruch is the ladle called a kli rishon or a kli sheni, and the bowl a kli shlishi. So we mentioned last time that it seems to be a stira in the Mishnah Berurah, and we mentioned it might be a sveika dedina, that the ladle could be called a kli rishon l'chumra, but the bowl could be either a sheni or a shlishi. So we view that as a shlishi. So there are, that's what the Shmir Shabbos notes. Maybe he should be machmir, but he notes in the footnote that there are those that are makel to consider the bowl a kli shlishi, and that's what the Aruch Shabbos says. Lo ma'isa, lachein lo ma'isa, but there are klau din amarak hamunach b'tocha ka'arek a kli shlishi umuter litin b'tocha chatichas pasu matzah. No problem putting anything in if you hold to the heter of kli shlishi. Because of all this discussion, though, recognize that Rav Avadia said the Shulchan Aruch, there's no problem whatsoever. So remember the yesod that we've said. There's never a problem of eating the food, because if there's any authoritative shita out there that is makel, then even if we paskin l'chumra, you can eat the food if it was done. So any type of reheating, any type of afiyah or bishul afiyah, b'di'evet is mutter, because the Shulchan Aruch, first of all, you have the Ravya, and then you have the Rav Avadia who says that's what the Shulchan Aruch's psak really is. So you could definitely eat the food b'di'evet. Rav Ribiat also, if you look on page 86 now, in source number 19, discusses warming up, taking food, taking chicken, taking anything, and warming it up in the way that you can warm it up, which we'll have to talk about in the next shiurim about shehiyah and achazara. But you can even bring them close to the fire. Close to the fire, even as long as it's not violating any of the Isurei D'Rabbanan, because of the kulas that it is already dry. Is already dry. So reverbiate. According to many poskim, only extremely intense dry heat radiating from a direct flame can cause a cooked food to become halachically roasted. But as we said, just warming things up is not a problem. As we said, based on that Chazon Ish. There is a discussion towards the end of this section about what about coffee. There are certain types of coffees where the coffee beans are already ground up and maybe they're roasted but they're not brewed. So roasted could be dry. That could be afia, tzli. And then afterwards you're going to put it into the coffee and then it could be bishul. So it's unclear exactly even if it was tzli. So you might say machlokas, Ashkenazim and Sfardim, and Sfardim could be meko. But as is pointed out, Rabbi Heber in the article here that's quoted, and others in the OU Kosher said it's not so clear that it's fully edible at the first stage. So it might not even be called afia or tzli, and therefore just use a kli shlishi if you rely on that heter of Reb Moshe. Okay, that is all part one. One of four discussions that we need to have. Number one. Number two, interesting discussion, small discussion about making toast on Shabbos. And you're not putting a toast into the toaster, obviously, but how would you make toast? You take bread and you put it on a hot plate. You put it somewhere where it's going to get toasted. Is there any issue with that? So the Magen Avram says that we agree that there's no tzli achar tzli, there's no afia achar afia, but there shouldn't be a problem, right? Because bread was baked. That's the dry heat, and now you're going to make it into toast. That's also dry heat. But there's a chumrah that's noted by the Sholem Eshiv. The Sholem Eshiv, or Yosef Shol Nathanson, one of the great poskim of the 19th century, says, maybe look back at that Rambam. Remember we discussed the Rambam all the way at the beginning of our Bishul discussion. The Rambam says, what's the definition of Bishul? Where you soften something hard, you harden something soft through the medium of heat. That's the Rambam's Lashon in Parak Tes. Klal shel davar, he quotes it there in source 23. Kol sheripa davar kasha, o shehiksha guf rach aser. So here you're taking something soft like a nice slice of bread, and you're going to make it hard by toasting it. Maybe that's bishul, says the Sholem Eshiv and a chumrah, right? He says yesh leser based on that Rambam v'tzarachian. The Ben Ish Chai does not think that that's an issue of bishul. He just thinks that if it's inedible totally, and now you make it edible, like by softening it, maybe that's makabah patish. But that is the chumrah of the Sholem Eshiv. The Shmir Shabbos actually is machmir here. The Shmir Shabbos, you don't have it in your book, but the Shmir Shabbos in the first parak, Siman Ayin Aleph, quotes this chumrah, and he notes in the footnote what it's based on. But he quotes, let me find it in Aleph Ayin Aleph. Again, you don't have it in front of you, but I'll quote it here from the Shmir Shabbos. Says the, let me just find it in the Siman about Bishul, Parak Aleph. Ein laniach lechem samach la'esh kedei lahatznimo, to make it ptsnimin, which is bread, toast. Ki harei halechem mishtanu miskasha bakach. It gets hard. Others are Mako. Rav Ovadia is Mako. The other poskim quoted here do not think it is a problem of Shlomo Zalman and Erdis and Karelitz. All think that it's not a problem making toast. It's not. That's not what the Rambam means. When you want to harden something soft, something hard, it's talking about metals, not food. Food, sometimes things become hard, things become softer. There's no issue by foods. So Rav Ovadia says in source 25 in Yechavadas, "Mikol makom nira she'ein divrei Sholem Eshiv mecharchan la'halacha, she'divrei Rambam einam shayachim l'gabi davar machol, shu derech achila, how you eat it." And he quotes either Tshuvas Rav Pa'olim that says it's makabeh patish. I also don't think that's an issue. So it is l'chora not a problem. He quotes that maybe Rabbi Oleg thinks it's based on whether you have to get a new status of the food or a new taste of the food. So here by the bread, it's not a new status, but it's a new taste. Maybe it's a machlokas, the taz and the eglital. Lamaisa or meko, as is summarized in the poskim, and you have in the source 28 in the Mishnah Berurah from Dirshu. Fine. Number two. So that's in terms of, that's related to the bishul achar afiyah, afiyah achar bishul, but that's number two discussion that we'll have. Number three. Kirev bishulo, mimaher bishulo, hastening the cooking process. If something's on a fire and it's going to cook in 10 minutes, and I do something, and I make a cook in 5 minutes, stirring it, remember we discussed that last time, I move it closer to the fire, that's aser d'oraisa. Kirev bishulo, even if it's going to cook anyway in a certain amount of time. If I hasten the process, makar bishulo, that's a problem. And Tosfos says that. What's a classic case? Putting the cover on a pot if it's not fully cooked. we discussed a number of times, the Rambam and the Rashba. The Rashba says, once something is machlo ben drusai edible, there's no more bishul daraisa. We're machlo like the Rambam. Up until mevushal kol tzarcho, it is potentially asur daraisa. So what happens if, big problem, I shouldn't start it this way. Don't take off the cover of the cholent pot if some of the cholent might not be fully cooked. Because then putting it back on is going to be a problem. Even if it's off the fire, putting it back on is going to be a problem. We discussed last week as an extension of that kolbo and the magus that putting it on, maybe you should put it on before you put it back on the in the crock pot. But here this is talking about when it's not fully cooked. So Tosfos in Shabbos Daf Mem Ches says that be careful putting something, wrapping something in karam v'ksasos if it's not fully cooked. And Shulchan Aruch quotes that. The Shulchan Aruch on Reish Nun Daled, Peiros hanecholam chayim. You could put fruit around the kedera. Umi yotzarach lizar shelo yachzer akisui im neskala mishach hashecha. Don't put a cover back on. V'shelo lahosev alavat sheyitzolo b'mnei shemimaher ligmar bishulam b'Shabbos. Right, you're being mamaher bishulo, and the Bir Halacha notes, because we're machmer like that Rambam, that there's still bishul daraisa that is relevant, even in a case where it is already cooked somewhat. And therefore, the Aruch HaShabbos says, 32, Nizbar la'el, sheroi lahakbid, right? And this is something that not everybody is aware of, right? What if the cholent's not fully cooked yet? You put it up a couple hours before Shabbos, some of the barley is going to be still hard, so putting the cover back on could be a very serious issue. Don't touch the cover unless it's fully cooked. If it's fully cooked, but you know it's going to get better, what's called mistamik v'yafalo, that's fine. That's fine. But if it's not fully cooked, it's a problem. Says the Aruch HaShabbos, Sheroi lahakbid, shekol hatavshilim ha'ondim ala eish, ala plata b'Shabbos. Make sure all of everything that's on the fire is mevushalam kol tzarcha b'knisas haShabbos. V'yem ein atash mevushal kol tzarcha. If it's not, afilu rak echad mimarkivav. Even if only one of the ingredients is not mavushal kol tzarcho, kugon kasha shuis shebachamin, asur lasos shum maisa, hamosef chom b'kedera. You can't do anything to increase the temperature. Umemar bazes bishulo, and therefore, what is included? Number one, aleph, can't move it closer to a fire if it's on a blech. Ein lekariv kedera b'matzav da'ela'ish, given shen nosif b'chom. V'yafilim chelek mimen omik, even keneged halava, even if it's already close, but you move it closer. Number two, if you take it off, putting it back on. Number three, if you took off the cover, you can't put it back on. Right? Putting another cover on it. Sometimes you have the covered Shabbos covering that one uses to keep things warm. So if there's anything under there that's not fully cooked yet, you can't do that. I'll give you another example that's not listed here. Some talk about reducing the volume. Let's say I have water. I put the water up right before Shabbos, and it's not boiled yet. That's a danger, because what happens if I take some of the water out while the rest of the water is not boiled yet? So now the rest of the water is going to cook faster because I took some of the volume out. That's also kirei bishulo. One has to know all types of kirei bishulo, of hastening the cooking process, is a problem, and one should be careful of that. Most other malachas this doesn't happen by. Most other malachas is it's either it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. Right? Either you don't have a case of doing something's going to happen quicker. Something's going to happen quicker. It could be maybe by zoreah. You put a seed in the ground and it's going to grow with the rain for it's supposed to rain on Monday. It's going to grow. But what if I water it? So that's making it grow faster. So you have it by some other malachas that's causing the malacha. But here you have it by Bishul. You have it by Bishul as well. Fine. Last discussion relating to Bishul. This one is not only a Bishul discussion. This is mostly a non-Bishul discussion, but it's put here in the booklet, and therefore we discuss it because it is an important issue. What about dealing with ice? Let's say I want to take water, a frozen thing, and put it on the fire. Obviously, I'm not allowed to do that. That's cooking the water. And it's lach, ein bishul lach, bishul balach. So let's talk generally about melting and defrosting. Melting and defrosting. The question is how to understand a Tosefta quoted in Shabbos Daf Nun Aleph. Nun Aleph on base. The Gemara quote, source number 33 now, on page 95. Ein merazkin. You're not allowed to crush up on Shabbos. Lo as hasheleg v'lo as habarad b'Shabbos. Snow or hail. bishvil sheyazuvu meimav. You can't crush on Shabbos snow or hail so that the liquid flows. You can't do that. Aval nosin u'lotocha kos u'lotocha ka'ara. But I could just put the snow or hail in a cup, pashtus with other stuff in there already, as we'll see. That you don't have to worry about. So what's the issue here? Right? What is the potential problem of crushing up ice or snow? So it's very not clear. 3 Shitas in the Rishonim. Rashi, the Sefer HaTruma, and the Rashba. And we'll see, the Rambam seems to like the Rashba. Says Rashi. Rashi comes up with a new term. Why can you do this? Molid. Not nolad, but molid. You are creating. You can't create on Shabbos something in a new form. You're being molid. If I'm taking ice and I'm crushing it up into a liquid, I am directly, actively creating a new form. And therefore, mishum dekam molid b'Shabbos, says Rashi, v'dami l'malacha. It's comparable to a malacha, shebore amayim ha'elu. I am creating this water. Molid. He doesn't say nolad. Nolad, that memela, something becomes new. No, molid, active. But you could put it into, you could crush it even maybe into water. Or Rashi says not. You could put it. What if I'm going to put it into? I'm going to put ice into a liquid. I'm going to put ice into a cup of soda. So then, as it melts, there's no molid. First of all, I'm not even doing anything. Maybe I could even crush it into the water because when it gets its new status, it's already bottle. It's not nikar, the new status. That's how the Achronim understand Rashi Shita. Only creating something new on its own. The Sefer HaTruma quoted, and it's a separate Sefer, but it's also quoted there in the Rashba, says, no, not molid, nolad. It's which is a form of muksa. Asur, says the Sefer HaTruma, nolad, not just molid. Defrosting something, says the Sefer HaTruma. Putting pashtida, which is an oily type of kugel, putting it near the fire, in order to defrost it on Shabbos. Problem, lefisha hashamnunis sheyesh ba nikrash. The liquid, the oil, was congealed. V'nase avekafui v'ata nimcha. Now it's going to be liquefied. V'nase tzalav avinolad. Right? You put anything into a situation where you're causing it to change its form, even if you are not actively crushing and changing the form. It's a problem. What about what's the heter of the Tosefta? You can put it into a kos, into a ka'ara. That's what I said before. If you take an ice cube and you put it into water, so then memela, it's not nikar when it changes form, and therefore it's not a problem. If you hide it in a karka, if you put it in a cup of wine, mutter, says the Sefer HaTruma. Even though it's going to be it's going to melt. Tahavi grama ba'alma. Ume'elav nimcha. You're not actively doing it. It's memela. V'gam noser b'toch hayayin. Ukshabara nimcha azu mis'arev u'misbatel b'yayin shebekos ve'nikar. Not a problem. So what's the issue of the Gemara? Rashi, molid. Sefer Truma, nolad. Rashba and Rambam, nothing to do with this. Rashba and Rambam say, the Rashba does not like the Sefer Truma. He notes the difference between molid and nolad. Umashakasav Rav, we should become molid. Lav lamesa mishim nolad kama. Rashi is not saying nolad like the Sefer Truma. Elasho isur mishim srach malacha. Rashi is because you're creating something. Aval the Sefer Truma kasav shu isur nolad. Ulidvarav, says the Rashba, according to the Truma, afilu b'chama asur. Doesn't even in the sun, even just room temperature, it should be nolad because it's about putting it in a situation where the form is going to change. But it's interesting, the Sefer Truma doesn't say just stop defrosting. Hidafka says putting it near a fire. So maybe that you have to have something active. In any case, the Rashba thinks that, no. The issue here is gzeira mishum, squeezing fruit. You're not allowed to squeeze fruit because of the malacha of dash, which Beth Hashem will get to. So this is similar to squeezing fruit. Says the Rashba in source 38, V'li nireh, to bishum gzeras schita de peris. Ha'omden lamash genoguba. Schitas peiros b'breisha barad v'asheleg l'meimein heimomden, because the barad is for their liquid and it's similar to a case of squeezing out fruit. Lefichach laseis latocha kos mutter she'eno nira ketzoches. That's why it's not doesn't appear like schita, like squeezing out if you're doing it into other liquid, only if it gets the status itself. So this is, and then the Maggid Mishnah thinks that this is the view of the Rambam, because the Rambam quotes this halacha in the context of squeezing out fruit. So what do we paskin? We have three different shitas. What is the basis of this isser of ein marazkin, about crushing fruit? Rashi, Truma, Rashba. Says the Shulchan Aruch in source 40. What about the pashtita case? Remember, the Truma says you can't put the pashtita next to the fire. The Shulchan Aruch says, yes, you can. So the Shulchan Aruch does not pass like the Truma. That we know for sure. Mutter litain ampanda kineged aish. Source number 40. Shinur ches tezayin. B'makam she'yaso ledisbo. You can't put it next to the fire in a yatso ledisbo, right? Why? You can. I'm sorry. You can put it there. You can put it there, right? There's ein bishul achar bishul. It's solid, and therefore, what's the issue? There is no issue. You're allowed. It's going to get liquefied. That's okay. Why? Because the Shulchan Aruch seems to either pass like Rashi, molid, and you're not actively doing anything, or like the Rambam and the Rashba, but not like the Truma. And the Ramah says v'yesh machmirin. So the Ramah says l'chadchila, we pass on like the Truma, not for stam defrosting. It seems like, because remember, even the Truma only talks about it by putting it by the fire. V'nagul lahachmir umiyu b'makom tzarech yesh lisbach hasvar rishona. But the Ramah says yesh lisbach hasvar rishona b'makom tzarech. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Hainu to azafilu l'chadchila mutter ubev'yevet b'chol gavni and lesser. Remember, but the yevet is for sure okay, because there's a sheet out there that says it is mutter. The Shulchan Aruch does quote the isser of crushing ice. That's the Gemara. You can't crush it, but no to tochakos. You can put it into a kos. Why? Because if you put it obviously into a separate kos, that is either molid or gzeira of schitas pears. The Mishnah Berurah explains that according to the Shulchan Aruch, you can leave ice to melt even l'chadchila, because we don't pass it like the Sefer HaTruma. You can leave ice to melt. According to the Ramah, you should not leave ice to melt, because l'chadchila it seems like the Sefer HaTruma. What should you do for the Ramah? You want to serve ice. Put it into the drink first. Put the drink in, and then put the ice in. That's what the Ramah would say, l'chadchila. Or the ice and put the drink right away, right afterwards. So again, you don't want it to melt, because the second it melts separately, it's nikar, and therefore it's a problem. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. So l'chadchila, taking ice out of the freezer and putting it into a cup. So the Shulchan Aruch it's all mutter. The only issue is active, molid. But according to the Ramah, he calls like the Sefer HaTruma l'chadchila, and therefore one can do it only in a case where, let's say, it's going to be melted into something right away. The Mishnah Berurah also does note that we're only talking about a case by the pashtita where there's going to be a serious puddle of liquid. But if it's just going to be moist, that's not called liquid. We discussed this by Lach and Yavish definitions in the earlier shiurim too. But the Mishnah Berurah says, "Avalam ein ala pashtita kol kach shuman." It doesn't have so much liquid on it. Oshama amido kol kach berichuk makom menachom. You're so far from the heat source. Shalo yeni moach hachiyasav lachutz. There won't be a puddle. Ela ma'at. So that's for sure okay. That's for sure okay, even according to the Ramah. So lamaisa, putting all this together in terms of defrosting. And we spoke about ice. We spoke about ice in terms of the seems to be machlokas b'chava the Ramah, whether you can just put it in a cup and have it melt. The Ramah says l'chadchila not to do that, because we're machmer like the Truma l'chadchila. Says the Aruch Shabbos, source 45, to sum this up. Im hotzi me'amakarer rotev dagim karush v'nifsha me'elav. You took from the fridge some type of congealed fish. Mutter la'achlo. And if you want to cause it, you can even warm it up. If you have a lot of gravy, so then that might be liquid. But again, even if you're going to put it into a place where it's not going to get the asol ledisbo, but you're going to be actively putting it there, maybe you shouldn't, because of molid, but it is mutter. And if it doesn't have too much liquid, then for sure it is mutter in any case. What about ice cubes? So again, the Aruch Shabbos says, now on source 46, page 100. One cannot crush. This has to do, by the way, also with snowballs. Snowballs, having a snowball fight. What are the issues about having a snowball fight on Shabbos? One of them is maraskin, because when you throw a snowball, so first of all, when you hold a snowball, when you make a snowball, that's probably risuk, right? And also throwing a snowball when it hits something, that's also risuk. So l'chora, that's a problem, besides other issues that might be there. Says the Aruch Shabbos, in larasik karach v'shel v'hofkam l'mayim. Mutter litan kubiyas karach. You could put ice cubes into liquid, according to everybody. Olotoch l'tamayim o mashka acher. Vein zakol b'isur risuk karach. Right, the karach is nimas me'elav. When ice melts, that's for sure not a problem. Haposkim nachluku. Ima isla rasik karach lofcha l'mayim nomar gambo van shakarach nimsa b'toch hamashke. So most are makel. Some say, he quotes here, what about if I have ice in my cup already and I want to like stir it, so like to make it cold? So there are those that say that's like risuk, because that's actively causing it to crush and get colder. But he quotes a machlokas about that. What about, according to this, l'chora, the Ramah, what about putting ice cubes in a bowl? Sometimes on the table you put ice cubes in a bowl. But according to the Ramah, you shouldn't do that like this based on the Sefer Truma. So there are those that say if you put ice cubes in a bowl, just put a little bit of water in the bottom of the bowl before. If you look in the Aruch Shabbos, he just quotes, Nasan kubios kerach beka'ara reka. If you already put it empty in a bowl, v'nimochan and melted, mutter machlokes, whether you're allowed to drink. Is that water muksa? According to the Sefer Truma, it's muksa. But the Ramah says, "B'makam sarach yesh lahakel." B'makam sarach. Mutar l'shos mayim ha'eluv. Yesh hakas v'tov limanim l'shos machlokas, whether you're allowed to drink that or not. But again, l'chadchila, according to the Ramah, it seems like put a little water in the bottom and then put the ice cubes in. And putting ice cubes directly into your cup, for sure, it is okay. Again, congealed fat or gravy. We spoke about that already, so that's what you have a couple of other sources related to that. How do you determine in terms of Bishul? So we mentioned then, but we'll mention it again now because the Magen Avram says it here, that Bishul for Lach and Yavish is determined by present temperature, not what it's going to be after you cook it. So if something's going to be liquefied after you cook it a little bit, that's still called solid. That's Yavish. The Magen Avram. And the Mishnah Berurah says, that is called a salad. It could be, the Aruch Shabbos says, it could be that if something is totally inedible when you first take it out and you're going to make it into a liquid, maybe that's more of an issue. Right? Let's say you have a frozen soup. A frozen fruit soup that you're going to eat cold. Frozen fruit soup. So he says maybe that's an issue. Right? Because right now when it's frozen, it's not edible. And that when you maybe that's really more of a no-let issue. So he says it could be that he's machalik in that way. Just two other points. What about the other way, going from liquid to solid? Not solid to liquid, but liquid to solid. Again, this has nothing to do with Bishul. But once we're on the discussion of ice, what about making ice on Shabbos? What about making Jello? So the Shmir Shabbos quotes the issue first relating to ice. So the Shmir Shabbos is you have to always be medactic in his language. When the Shmir Shabbos first wrote his Sefer, he didn't realize it was going to become such a staple of observant Jews' houses. So he wrote it. So he realized when he realized people were being medactic in every word that he wrote. That's why he wrote so many editions, and he was very medactic, especially towards the later editions, especially the last edition, right before he was nifter. So that's why if you look here in the Shmir Shabbos in Perek Yud Oz Dalet in source 51, he doesn't say asur, he doesn't say mutter. He says tov lihimana, better not to. Meaning to do what? To make ice on Shabbos. To make ice on Shabbos, better not to. Why? Because that's like creating a new form. And we said it works the other way. Maraskins, this is the opposite of maraskin, but it might be the same issue. But he doesn't say it's usher. Why? Because you're not actually doing it. You're putting it into the freezer. That's true, but that's not the same as maraskin. Not as active. So that's the Shmir Shabbos. Tov li'manim milasis b'Shabbos v'yandav mayim l'toch te hahakpa'a amanas l'hovchan l'kubias kerach. Unless there's a tzarach. If you're having a lot of guests and a really hot day, a tzarach. But other poskim are makel straight up. Right? Rabbi Shalom Rosner says it's mutter based on the Shulchan Aruch, based on Sfardim. For the Shulchan Aruch says you're allowed to let ice melt. Right? That's the Arlet Zion. Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Tzitz Eliezer are both also quoted as saying there's no problem making ice on Shabbos. You have in their Masoros Moshe, he says 53. He says, why did the poskim quote this earlier? Right? Things were cold in the days of old. Right, even though they didn't have freezers, but still. Says Rav Moshe. They had cold air. Nobody says you can't put water outside on Shabbos. Nobody says that. It must be it's not a problem. Right? They had, not even, you want to say the Amoraim didn't have it so cold in Bavel, but the Rishonim, Right? And many of the Rishonim, they lived in cold places, the Achronim for sure. So Ramosha assumes it's Lakula. The Tzitz Eliezer assumes it's Lakula. He says a different svar. You have it there in the footnotes because it's not a true form, the Tzitz Eliezer says. Unless it's in the freezer, it's going to melt. It's going to melt anyway in room temperature. And therefore, it is not a true change of form. And what about the other idea about making other solid items? So the Shevet HaLevi talks about making jello. So he says, first of all, it could be an issue of lush. Lush, which we didn't talk about yet, kneading, where you have it's not a normal case of kneading, where you have dough, but here you're ending up with powder and water, and it's going to end up as a solid, as a semi-solid. So it's an issue of lush. Maybe it could also be an issue of a creation, like we said, you're creating a new form. Would you say the same thing by ice, by jello? Maybe, but either way, he assumes it's a problem. He thinks one shouldn't make it because it's similar to making ice, and it could be a lush issue as well. Okay, we'll have to stop here. This is the last shiur on Bishul D'Oraisa. This is shiur number 2 in our volume 18 of the Tzurba Hilchot Seforim. And B'ez Hashem, we will continue next time with Bishul D'Rabbanan number 1. That is shehiyah, leaving foods on. How do you leave foods on a heat source before Shabbos? Then hachazara, how do you put things on a heat source on Shabbos? And then hatmana, how do you insulate before Shabbos and on Shabbos? Have a great day.